This module will guide you in how to use the assessment of reasoning tool to assess a learner's ability to direct diagnostic evaluations in a high-value manner. Testing should be used to evaluate hypotheses that have been generated from the prioritized differential diagnosis, which was discussed in Module 3. High-value testing focuses on the most likely diagnosis on the prioritized differential diagnosis and often includes can't-miss diagnoses and sometimes less likely diagnoses. There are 4 distinct areas of performance to consider for high-value testing. Was testing directed towards the most likely diagnoses and, if indicated, the can't-miss diagnoses? Were the most accurate testing modalities chosen? Was the testing performed in the most appropriate and efficient order? And was unnecessary testing avoided? Examples of unnecessary testing include testing when the diagnosis is nearly certain without the need for further investigation, or testing for low probability, low priority conditions before higher probability diagnoses have been appropriately excluded. Inappropriate testing increases healthcare costs, prompts further unnecessary testing, and can cause patient harm through overtreatment. Your learner gives the following report of a patient.
Mr. Lynch is a 42-year-old man with diabetes who presents with acute fever, cough, and left-sided pleuritic chest pain. Pertinent findings include a temperature of 38.1, an oxygen saturation of 95%, and faint left basilar rales.
The learner then articulates her prioritized differential diagnosis as follows: most likely pneumonia, less likely pericarditis, unlikely myocardial infarction, and do not want to miss pulmonary embolism. Let's use the ART to show you how to assess this learner's testing strategy. The following is an example of a learner whom you would mark as complete on the ART for high-value diagnostic testing. Your learner gives the following diagnostic plan.
I think the most useful test would be a chest X-ray, which would modify the probability of pneumonia substantially, if positive or negative. I'd also like an EKG to help exclude pericarditis or myocardial infarction. EKG is not perfectly sensitive for either, but the pre-test probability for both is already low. His Wells score is 0, and I do not think he needs a D-dimer.
In this example, the learner proposes the best test to address the likelihood of the most probable diagnoses, chest X-ray for pneumonia, discusses the merits of testing, or not, for the can't-miss diagnoses, pulmonary embolism, and avoids excessive testing for the less likely or unlikely diagnoses by stopping at EKG for pericarditis or myocardial infarction. This is an example of a low performer who you would mark as partial on the ART. Your learner gives the following diagnostic plan.
I would like to get a chest X-ray to evaluate for pneumonia. But we also need an EKG and troponin if we are thinking about acute coronary syndrome. I'd like to screen him for PE with a D-dimer, and if it is positive, I would like to get a CTA to rule out PE. That would also give us a better look at pneumonia, which I think is the leading diagnosis. I would check the ESR and CRP because they are sometimes used to diagnose pericarditis.
Here, the learner proposes the best test to address the most likely diagnosis, a chest X-ray for pneumonia. However, she also orders a number of biomarkers that are non-essential and, if elevated, are likely to be false positive or non-diagnostic in this clinical setting. If the learner did not elaborate the correct prioritized differential diagnosis earlier in the process, then she is unlikely to perform well in this category. If a learner chooses the right tests but for the wrong reasons, the learner should not be assessed as complete in this domain on the ART. A teacher can help the learner prioritize high-value testing by guiding them in the articulation of a prioritized differential diagnosis and then asking them to discuss the merits and harms of testing for one condition in each category: most likely, less likely, unlikely, and can't-miss diagnosis. In summary, high-value testing directs testing toward the most likely diagnoses, analyzes the merits of testing for can't-miss diagnoses, chooses the most accurate testing modality, avoids unnecessary testing which includes inaccurate tests, early testing for unlikely diagnoses, or testing when no further investigation is needed to make a diagnosis.